you so much for joining us today. We've been, we joke about how we've been wanting to get you on here for a long time, but man, it surely is it's a pleasure to sit down with you and get to talk finally.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk shop. I eat and breathe this stuff. This is what I do. And so, yeah, I'm always happy to spend some time talking shop. Absolutely.
Well, you definitely made some waves here locally in the Atlanta area during the ECC conference after your talk there. I tell you, there were a lot of people that were like, that guy with the long blonde hair. Oh my gosh, he was beautiful.
Great. That's what I'm concerned. You know what? If I ever need an agent, I know who I'm coming to. All right.
Well, I was really embarrassed because I thought they were talking about me forever, and then I realized it was you, and I was like, "This is awkward."
Well, man, I think I think our audience they would really be missing something special if they didn't know about your background, didn't know your story before we introduce what you do now as a emergency physician and researcher and EMS medical director. All of that is amazing, but I think what really sets the tone is your story. So if you don't mind, tell us about, where'd you grow up and what got you started in all this?
So I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. I'm from my family lives in a little town called Urbana. It's got 500 people. It's quicker to go most places by boat.
And forgive my ignorance. What state are we talking about here?
Virginia. Sorry, Commonwealth of Virginia.
Gotcha.
Commonwealth of Virginia, Chesapeake Bay. There's 5 rivers. Urbana's on the Rappahannock.
Awesome.
So it's if you know where Richmond is, it's about 45 miles east as the crow flies from Richmond. Mm. And so how did I get my start? I went to UVA to be a lawyer, and took a summer job as an open water lifeguard in Virginia Beach. And most of my supervisors at the time were medics, and I'm young and I'm impressionable. I'm 18 years old and I'm a open water lifeguard. I rode along a couple times because Virginia Beach has this wonderful still has an all volunteer service.
Wow.
For a large municipality, which is in large part unheard of, where in most large areas, as the municipality grows, they essentially outgrow the ability to nurture a volunteer service. In Virginia Beach, rather than allowing many of these smaller volunteer services to have the same fate, effectively combine them all. And so I rode along in the ambulance, and then I decided in the middle of my, I think it was my first year of college, that what I really wanted to do was go to medical school. And so I went and became an EMT. And then I went and got my medic in Richmond and Odemsa. And so I commuted from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville to Odemsa to get my medic. And then I rode with Rescue Company 1 in Charlottesville. CARS, as it was affectionately known, the Charlottesville Albemarle Rescue Squad, at one point was the busiest all-volunteer service in the nation when I was there, and that's circa like 96 to 03. They would run 12,000 calls a year, all volunteer.
Wow.
And so I did that all through undergrad. I went to Fire Academy one summer. That's actually how I met my wife. We were living in the same apartment complex, and I came home from Fire Academy one afternoon after fighting fire all afternoon. It's like 100 degrees, and I smelled horrendous. and I meet this beautiful woman and we had a portal apartment, so you had to walk by everybody to get to your apartment. And I walk by this beautiful woman and I say hello, and she goes, "You smell bad." And that's how I met my wife. And
But
so
it's true love if she can move past
right.
that. Yeah.
She can look past that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and so I got bitten by the bug. I rode as a volunteer medic all the way through medical school at the University of Virginia. I lived on the range in this. They have this odd thing where you live in these rooms that Jefferson built as part of the original structure. And I used to park the chase car out front. I take the chase car at night and chase.
That is so cool.
And then I went to medical school there at Virginia. I graduated with my MD and a master's in clinical trials and biostatistics. And I went to residency I truly chose my residency based on the place that would put me in a helicopter. And
really?
that was, yes, absolutely. And that was the University of Chicago. And I matched at the University of Chicago. At the time, it was mandatory flight. So the first day of second year, I was a flight physician flying doc nurse in a Dolphin. N365 UC was the University of Chicago helicopter. If you watch the old show ER, right, yeah. The helicopter in that show is the one I used to fly on.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And and so I went and trained there and spent 3 years there and was chief of the boat my third year and got done and got recruited to Richmond to be a fellow in emergent cardiac care. And so I trained to do all of the fun stuff in cardiology, short of, I can't cath people. And so I don't cath and I don't have to do clinic. But I spent a lot of time in the ICU and stuff during fellowship. And then started as a junior faculty member and about 10 years ago and while I was a junior faculty member, I was medical director of Henrico County. That's a suburb north of Richmond. Everybody knows Richmond Ambulance Authority in the EMS world. They have a long, very storied tradition. But I was responsible for the northern suburb, which is Henrico. We had 500 personnel, 200 medics. At the time, we had an RSI program, which was unheard of.
Wow.
So I had 29 or 30 RSI medics, and we were all hazards. And then I got done and got recruited to UAB to be a scientist. And so I spent the last decade at UAB doing science. The type of science I do, I'm a resuscitation scientist. All of my work is in intra-arrest or post-arrest care. And recently, in the last couple of years, I branched into disparities in resuscitation because I think really that's the new frontier in resuscitation science.
Wow, awesome. I tried to write all that down. I didn't get all that.
So tell us about where you work right now. Tell us about your shop.
So I work at UAB, the University of Alabama, Birmingham. That is not Roll Tide, right? Roll Tide is in Tuscaloosa. It's an hour west of us. That's where the undergrads are. UAB is got most of the graduate schools in the UA system. So on the campus of UAB, I've got a public health school, a nursing school, the School of Medicine, interestingly, the library science, the School of Optometry,
wow.
Health professions. I have just about every graduate school except a law school. The law school, interestingly, for whatever reason, is still in Tuscaloosa. And the University of Alabama, Birmingham, or UAB, as we call it, the home of the Blazers. We are the Death Star of modern medicine.
Nice.
So I'm going to screw these numbers up, but we're in the top. I think we're in the top 10 for largest hospitals in the United States. We're in the top 5 for largest teaching institutions. The hospital has 1,187 beds. I have over 250 ICU beds. The hospital proper spans 9 city blocks. And we are the only for the state of Alabama. So unlike other states where every major metropolitan center has kind of one of us, and maybe on a smaller scale, but has one of us, where you have kind of a quaternary, tertiary/quaternary center. In Alabama, we're it, right? So to put that in perspective, we're the only burn center, we're the only level 1 trauma center, we're the only level 3
Wow.
NICU, we're the only place that does MFM, maternal fetal medicine, so high risk obstetrics. We're the only place you can get a transplant, and then from UAB, all the major municipalities have kind of what you would think of as a community or regional hospital, maybe 250 beds. And then outside of that, you rapidly get remote very, very fast. And counties will have a single critical access hospital. The vast majority of counties have a single critical access hospital. If you're lucky, it's got 25 beds. It probably has 4 to 6 beds in the ED. Some of them have a 2 or 4 bed ICU. Most of them don't. Average daily census in those hospitals might be 5. And so almost everything that is serious in the state of Alabama gets transferred to us at UAB. If you get shot in the state of Alabama, you're getting flown to us.
Awesome.
So our catchment area goes all the way east to kind of Grady and Atlanta, south to the Gulf, north till you get to Vanderbilt, and west until you get to kind of New Orleans. Jackson, Mississippi's in there between us and New Orleans, but really a lot of the folks in Mississippi just come to us. And so we have a catchment area of like 7 million maybe. So we're the biggest employer in the state of Alabama. We're the Death Star.
What is, I know a lot of people understand like ED volume. What is your yearly volume in your ED?
So it's hard to kind of gauge that, right? Because COVID screwed everything up. My guess is our ED volume, a fair assessment of our ED volume is probably somewhere in the 85 to 90,000 visit range. And you have to take that in, you have to understand that we don't do kids at UAB. So we have a separate, I think 250, maybe 300 bed children's hospital literally across the street. It's part of the complex, right? But it's a separate entity across the street. And I think they see like 35,000 a year. That's kind of the volume. To put it in perspective for trauma, this year we had, I think, 6,300 activations for trauma, of which half are penetrating.
Wow.
All right, Alabama's a free carry state. It's relatively unrestricted to possess a firearm as long as you're not like a felon or something. And so there's lots of penetrating trauma. So that for those who work or are around a level 1 trauma center, a level 1 trauma center only has to have something like, I think, 1,200 maybe activations a year in order to have enough volume to be level 1. So we literally will see in the course of a year 5-fold. Like we could handle. We have the volume for 5 trauma centers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, with all of that activity and all of the projects and the research and the science that you're involved with that we will touch on in this conversation, how do you stay involved and engaged with paramedics and with EMS? Because I know that's where your heart is. Your heart is in emergency medicine, resuscitation. How are you able to stay involved?
Well, so I've spent my career building systems of care. Like I started as a STEMI guy. So when I started and we published kind of the first couple of papers about ER docs activating the cath lab, that was very novel. And then the idea we could push it out to medics and let EMS providers activate the cath lab, that was very novel at the time. Now I think in large municipalities, we kind of take it for granted, actually. But I think the way I stay engaged is if you treat medics as professionals, right, that they are, that they return the favor, right? And you can ask more of our medics. right? And then also emergency medicine is also I'll say emergency medicine is we operate best when we have the esprit de corps of a family, right? It's because in my shop, I cannot possibly supervise everything all the time. There's no way. There's too much volume, and I have to rely not only on my residents, my house staff, but I've got to rely on my good nurses and my good medics to know enough to warn me before bad things happen, right? And that means you got to work with smart people. And if you, I think if you treat medics with respect, right, for the professionals that they are, frankly, they rise to the occasion. It's certainly what I always did when I was a medic, and the intangibles that you get from that, I mean, they're gold.
Do you think that medical directors should be well compensated, or should it be more of a pro bono or an altruistic endeavor for that group, or should it really become something that's part of a profession?
You get what you pay for, right? Okay. So when I was a medical director in Henrico County, I had a contract, and the fire department put up money that covered my clinical time, and I was physically on site 1 full day a week, right? And then the rest of the time I was on call, right? If they needed something, they needed me. Sometimes there'd be a SWAT action or a mass casualty. If there's a plan 1, I was going. Unless I was physically on duty in the ED. But if there was a plan 1 and I was not physically in the ED receiving, I was expected to be there. That's the way it ought to be. In Alabama, we have the opposite model, and medical directors, for the most part, are not compensated. And outside of major municipalities, you get what you pay for. And so my hope is, there's been not a fair bit of controversy with the creation of the EMS board. And my hope is that what that will do in the long run is elevate the profession, both as a medical director and trickle down to the medics, right? So that it will raise the professional expectations, the pay, the leave, the benefits, the education, so that ultimately we're providing better service to the communities which we serve. You have to start with providing an engaged medical director, and frankly, the way you do that now is you got to pay for it.
So I don't know if it's state by state, but is there any truth nationally? I know I've heard several times people say, well, a medical director that is compensated is more liable. So if you take no compensation, it decreases or eliminates your liability. Do you know anything about that nationwide or by state?
I think so. I am not an attorney. I could go get my wife. She would be able to tell us. But that all joking aside, I think that is because the medical director hopes in that instance that if they don't take any money, that they're still shielded by like a good Samaritan law, right? And that will vary from municipality to municipality and state to state. I don't think so. And let's talk about that for a second. The EMS cases, on occasion, I get asked if I will look at like a lawsuit, and frankly, EMS cases are few and far between. They really are. But the ones that I always look at, or the ones that have ever been shown to me, are either horribly egregious, right? No one in their right mind would try to defend this, okay? Or alternatively, they're like abandonment, right? It's like somebody chooses not to respond, or they refuse someone who is clearly intoxicated, and that person walks out into traffic or something. Those are the cases that EMS gets, that lawyers get, and so I don't really think that it provides a modicum of liability coverage. I, as a physician, and a guy who's had 500 providers operate under my license, I would much rather be engaged and have whatever resources I need to be engaged. I think that serves the community and serves the purpose much better than not take any money and hope I'm not going to get sued.
Mm.
I think that comes from the Good Samaritan law, and I'm not sure that applies well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it makes almost an excuse to not be involved then.
You just sign a paperwork, right?
Right. And that's the biggest. Do you guys do an EMS fellowship at UAB?
Yeah, we have an EMS fellowship. We had 2 fellows last year. We have 2 fellows this year. Yeah. I'm on the faculty for the fellowship because I'm also EMS boarded. And we're turning out true EMS medical directors now. Folks who know what a high performing system can do. And,
now, with those, who are typically those people that go to those lengths? Did they have an EMS background coming into it, or did something just click with them in residency that they said, I really want to be involved with this as a career?
I think most of them at some point have had an EMS background or touched it in some way before they go to fellowship. Very few, I think, come to that naturally during residency, right? That would be my gut instinct. Also, you got to know what you're getting into if you're going to be an EMS fellow, right? So you essentially understand that when you graduate fellowship, if you're going to go be an EMS medical director, you're going to a large municipality with a large high performing system, because that's frankly the people. Those are the agencies that are demanding medical directors who are EMS boarded, and rightfully so. And those are the ones that are paying for the coverage.
Yeah. Do you see an opportunity anywhere in the rural areas to kind of do a group effort where you would have a medical director over a large area, maybe of several counties?
Yeah, no, that would be ideal, right? Because we need quality medical direction, maybe more in rural areas than we need it in large municipalities, because the transport times are so much longer. Yeah. And I think that there is I don't want to call it the learning curve, right? But the expertise gets generated or gets retained so quickly when you're in a large municipality and I'm going to run 10, 12 calls a shift, as opposed to in a rural area where you might run, a handful. And so the idea, that's very attractive. The idea that you have a medical director who might be a regional medical director, right? And would have medical direction for 5, 6, 8, 10 agencies. There's a lot of economy of scale in that manner. Some regions do that. There are regions in Virginia that do that, that provide medical direction on a regional level. And there's pluses and minuses to it. Frankly, right, this is EMS. If you've seen one EMS system, you've seen one EMS system. And so I think to the extent that, EMS is always local, if it works for the municipality, I think it's something to explore.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's kind of move towards the research and the projects that you have been involved in, because I ultimately want to end up with resuscitation. And let's just start there. What is it that fascinates you so much about resuscitation? What is it that gives you the passion for that in particular?
Resuscitation is the ultimate time-dependent illness, right? The therapeutic window is so very narrow, right? This even more narrow than STEMI, more narrow than stroke, more narrow than trauma. It is the ultimate time-dependent window.
It's quite literally live or die.
Yeah, right. I mean, people don't fibrillate and 10 minutes later just stop. Right.
That's a good point.
Like that doesn't happen. Right. And truly, modern EMS was built on a system designed to do two things: resuscitate people who fibrillate and transport trauma, care for and transport trauma. Now, we've taken on lots of other things in the 30, 40, 50 plus years of EMS tradition. Okay. But really, that's what it was designed to do. It was to treat cardiac arrest and deliver trauma to a trauma center. And so that's where my passion comes. And funny that you talk about it. I actually went to fellowship to be a STEMI guy. I didn't want to have anything to do with this resuscitation stuff because I came out of residency and said, all these people die. Mimi Pepperdy. So Joe Ornato of Joe Ornato fame. Joe is a legend, right? His wife is Mimi Pepperdy. And she is an interventional cardiologist. Joe's a cardiologist by training. And I distinctly remember she loves to tell the story of me interviewing with them for fellowship and her suggesting, and this is 03 maybe. Yeah, I was just finishing residency, 03. And she suggests, maybe I want in on this resuscitation thing. And I said, no, I'm a STEMI guy. I don't want to do that. And this is like the heyday, right? New England Journal has just published 2 randomized controlled trials back to back about hypothermia. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I was a fellow, and I got bitten by the bug during fellowship. I resuscitated a cardiac arrest and cooled him down. And I got bitten by it. But it is fundamentally because the physiology is amazing. It's unlike anything else in medicine in terms of the time-dependent nature of it. It requires a system to take care of it well. It is not owned by a single silo or a single specialty, right? It's not stroke is owned by neurology, STEMI is owned by cardiology, trauma is owned by surgery. Cardiac arrest is cardiac arrest. And and so that's what makes me passionate about it. Truly.
So when you first started kind of going after this with cardiac arrest, and you said that, one of the things you said was, well, everybody dies. So it's not too interested in that. Prior to you kind of embarking on this area of research, what kind of conclusions did you come to very early as to why we have not moved the needle much in the last several decades?
Well, so I was really colored by my experience as a medic, right? So when I came through as a medic, 96, I took my first ACLS class in 96, right? This is back when you could fail ACLS, right? Right? Like it was a badge of honor that you passed as a medic, you passed ACLS.
Yeah, before they started giving out participation trophies, it was actually difficult.
Yeah, it was very difficult. Like people failed.
Yeah.
And like doctors failed.
You'd lose sleep the night before.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I mean, as an AHA volunteer, I can say that. Like I know, right? I mean, I distinctly remember that, and I was very colored by my experience as a medic, which was nobody ever survived. Like we either called it in the field or we transported them to the hospital, and they got called immediately. But like it. And the survivors were unicorns, right? And I say that as an analogy, right? You, as a medic, you knew somebody who had once resuscitated a cardiac arrest and they survived.
Mm.
But nobody ever knew who that was, right? Like you'd heard this story around the firehouse, but there are these unicorns out there, right? And while it feels like we haven't moved the needle a whole lot in high performing system nationwide, the numbers kind of look the same as they always have, kind of right now. If you look at microcosms or small areas where there's a high performing system, we really have moved the needle. Like we've really demonstrated this is a fixable thing, right? And so there's hope. And the thing that sets those little bastions of cardiac arrest survival, let's just call it, that's what it is, right? Those municipalities that are high performing from other municipalities is just the system that's built, right? It's not like native geography or, limestone in the water.
Right. Or genetics.
Right. I mean, there's not like, this place is really rich and they've got a bunch of devices and nobody else has got this stuff. And right. Like, that's not what it is. Like, it's literally just building a system that from the building blocks that you have and making the investment in the system. It's not about buying ambulances. It's not about it. That's not what it's about. And so that's the other thing that really motivates me, that this is fundamentally available to anybody, right? It's just simply about if it's a priority for the community.
So kind of as a follow-up to that, we do know that we have legitimate communities. Of course, everybody's going to, know Seattle and Arizona, Janesville, Wisconsin, some of those places where, some of the giants in resuscitation are.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in the way that they are measuring not only their system performance, but the way that they're measuring outcomes? Are they doing it consistently? We as we go around and, we know a lot of systems and have had a lot of conversations, and depending on who you talk to, so-and-so, they've got a 25% survival rate, got a 50% survival rate. But when you press people on it, it's really difficult to nail down where they're getting those outcomes. A lot of it is, as you're saying, we kind of just polled each other and said, I remember we had this cardiac arrest, and maybe they're working with hospitals to get true outcomes, maybe they're not. Are those high performing systems, how are they measuring cardiac arrest differently than in other areas of the country?
They're making a commitment to measure, and then they're improving because they know what their data is. That's the difference, right? They make a fundamental commitment to take all comers and measure all of them. And that requires an investment. That requires an investment in pulling there's a data infrastructure that has to exist there, right? There's lots of ways to skin that cat, but fundamentally they're measuring it. And then when they measure it, then you know how you can improve. But all of those municipalities you talk about, Seattle, right? Seattle, where like if you fall asleep on a park bench, right, there's like a 50-50 shot that someone's going to walk over, you're going to wake up with somebody CPR to you, right? So Seattle, Arizona, Milwaukee, Richmond, Virginia, the places that truly have demonstrated with real numbers, real believable numbers, that it's possible, right? It's possible to hit like a 50-50 ROSC rate. Like, that's doable. It's doable to get to a 30% survival rate, right? All comers. That's an achievable thing. However, you absolutely have to collect that data to know and be able to tout that that's what you're doing. Now, there's a lot of return. That all sounds very expensive. there's a lot of return on investment for collecting that data. It just has to be realized.
And to kind of piggyback off of what you just said, I think it would be good to appreciate honest data. And, it's whenever you say it's doable to achieve these percentages, what I want people to understand is it's not easy. It takes a lot of culture change. It takes a lot of work. In your experience, how would a municipality or a service go about getting the true raw data? And
You got to collect it.
Gotcha.
You got to set up the data infrastructure to collect it. In the old days, before we had EMS, EMR, right? It was manual. Like I remember in Henrico County, like physically going through manually like handwritten cardiac arrest call sheets, right? But what it requires is a commitment, right? And that commitment is not. This is not a switch that you turn on January 1 year and go, all right, we're doing it. Right? It starts with planning years before, when you decide you're going to buy an EMR or whatever, and you buy one that will track the numbers and talk to CARES for you. Mm. CARES being the cardiac arrest registry housed in Atlanta. Right, and then maybe the next step is an education program for the medics beyond, hey, did you take ACLS? Okay, good. Mm-hmm. And then there has to be engagement by the medical director. It's got to be a priority for the medical director. So when I was in Henrico County, when I walked in Monday morning, it was like clockwork. I walked in Monday morning. I said hi to the chief. I said good morning before he went to ops. I then walked over to the deputy. The deputy chief gave me 10 minutes before he went to ops with the chief, because I needed to know if we had any personnel or medical error or any hot button things that I needed to handle, or if we'd had an incident or a VIP got carried or whatever it was, right? I needed 10 minutes with the deputy. And then I left, and it was understood that I went and spent the next hour and a half with my QI director. And we reviewed we started with every cardiac arrest that had been run in the last week, and every cardiac arrest, and then every other call for which either there was a need or that month we were reviewing. So 1 month it was all the asthma calls, right? 1 month, whatever the thing was that we thought we had a need to review. And then we went from that. Typically I had lunch with the chief, and then in the afternoon was education. And I treated education with the medics. I did it. I did an hour of the education with the medics on a rotating basis, and I treated the medics like docs get treated, where you do CME. Mm. We would cover a topic. Typically, mine was about whatever we needed to cover. Oftentimes, it was resuscitation or STEMI or something that was in my wheelhouse. And then we also did an hour of case review. Let's talk about these arrests we ran and what we did well and what we didn't. Because if you don't have a robust QI culture, you can't improve. And that I think that is agency wide for all the calls, but specifically in terms of cardiac arrest, it's too time dependent not to review.
So as you move forward in your career on starting true resuscitation research and science, can you talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls that we run into, or actually talk a little bit about the difference between a registry, something like CARES or NCDR, that kind of stuff that are registries, versus true research when we're really trying to compare apples to apples?
Yeah. So, all right. So you can do research out of a registry. It's retrospective. right? So I have a young buck at my shop, Dr. Ryan Kurt, and he does a bunch of this work with CARES, right? And you submit a question to CARES, and CARES will pull the data for you, and you can analyze the data. But fundamentally, that registry is just collecting data, and once a year they spit out a report, right? And there's lots of value to that, but we're not really kind of doing science. We're kind of reporting the numbers in a registry, right? As registries get larger, so CARES, I think, covers like 80% of the population in the United States now. As registries get larger, they get more powerful in terms of the conclusions you can draw. But there has to be research done out of that registry to draw those conclusions. The registry itself doesn't do the science. Someone comes to that resource to do science out of that resource. And that's fundamentally different than something like, I don't know, what's the dose VF trial that's being done in Canada, right? So Sheldon is up there in Canada, and he's comparing, as I recall, it's a randomized controlled trial to take care of VF arrests, right? And he's comparing vectors, and I think there's one arm that does dual sequential, if I'm not mistaken. But that is true science, right? That is a randomized controlled trial being done in the pre-hospital space. Those types of trials and that science is very challenging in the pre-hospital space, and so we don't do a whole lot of it, because most scientists, frankly, are uncomfortable doing science outside the hospital.
Yeah, I think we saw some of those difficulties. I think were you involved in some of the rock trials?
Yeah.
So Primed, that was one example that was very, very difficult to do.
Yes.
In the pre-hospital setting. But so with that, do you find even in certain registries, paramedics not necessarily even all educated the same way as to what some of the fields mean? For instance, we've run into some stuff recently that we have looked at with some registries on, for instance, bystander AEDs. We have found that the definition of a bystander is not necessarily the same everywhere. Sure. So whether that's a police officer or a firefighter, and I know you're going to use the term that I really like, so I'm going to let you. I'm not going to steal your thunder on that. But does everyone is everyone on the same page, do you think, with what we're calling bystander CPR or bystander AED? Just as an example. I
hope, but that's the responsibility of the registry to educate the provider. Okay, right? So if there's a saying in research and science that garbage in equals garbage out. Okay, so if I can't rely on the data coming in, and one of the ways you get unreliable data is there's no consensus on the definition. Okay, right? If I get garbage in, then my conclusion, the quality of the conclusion that I draw, regardless of how rigorous the analysis is only as good as the data coming in. Okay, so literally garbage in, garbage out. So it behooves us that if we're going to make the investment in a registry, if we're going to do it, we ought to do it right, so that if we're going to draw some conclusions, which is the value of a registry, that those conclusions are correct, right? The last thing we really want to do is change practice in the wrong direction, and it's predictable, right? Those of us who have been, I won't say old, those of us who are experienced enough remember the days of giving lidocaine for PVCs, right? We gave a lot of lidocaine away for PVCs. Yeah, what were we doing? We were killing people.
It was before my time.
Yeah, right. No, if you had more than 6 PVCs in a minute or something, we used to give lidocaine for that.
Yep,
Wow.
bolus and drip.
Yeah, right. Like, man, we should treat that, right? And why? Well, because there was maybe some data, and maybe and the conclusion, and what happened? We went and did some really rigorous data where we all agreed what the definitions were, and we got some conclusions that were the exact opposite.
Mm.
Right? We were killing people with this stuff. And so while I appreciate that everyone wants to, maybe everyone, I hope everyone wants to participate in a registry, the quality of the conclusions you can draw from the registry is only as good as the data that comes in, and it is worth the investment, right, to educate our providers, because in large part in EMS, it's the providers who are entering the data. I mean, let's be honest. There's nobody riding along with the medic who says, "Oh, let me handle that for you," right? There are no scribes in EMS, right? There's this idea of scribes for physicians, right? There are no scribes.
May have better paramedic retention if there were, though.
Well, yeah, no kidding, right? Or maybe that's the rookie. It's been a long time. But if we don't educate the folks who are entering the data, then the conclusions we have are unreliable.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I think that was so important that CARES did also, was to bring in the hospital with it. I think that was the missing link. We would, you sit around and, like you said, you sit around and go, oh, well, who had a survivor? Oh, well, I did. Well, how do you know you had a survivor? Oh, well, that's because it was my neighbor's uncle that showed up at the last family reunion, so we know he survived. Right. So we run into, or I personally run into systems where they say, oh, our survival rate is this. It's 60%. We have a 60% ROSC rate. Well, that's not survivor. A survivor is you walk out of the hospital, and if you're not getting those data from leaving the hospital, then you're not getting your true outcomes. I think that was one of the things that CARES really overcame. For the first time, connecting EMS to the hospital. And so with that, what is the next stage before you tell us a little bit more about the specific research you are doing? What is the next stage of research or data gathering and analysis specifically from pre-hospital?
So you just highlighted, you started to highlight the evolution in resuscitation science that we've come to, right? So the outcome we used to measure, the very first outcome we ever measured was ROSC. And that was a combination of, one, that's what you got and it was rare. Okay, right? That was a win. That was a big win, right? And two, you were limited by how far you could track these people, right? The hospital wasn't giving you any data. So the only meaningful outcome you could track was ROSC rate. And really, that ROSC rate isn't telling you anything. Because you got a pulse back in the field doesn't mean that person survives to get admitted, survives 5 days from now, makes it out of the ICU. I mean, we haven't even made it out of the hospital yet, right? But that was the first outcome. And then we evolved. So we finally had a critical mass and we figured out kind of how to get ROSC. And we evolved. And so the next outcome that we tracked in systems that were high performing was survival out of the hospital, right? You left the hospital with a pulse. That was the next evolution. That's all well and good, but like a lot of those people left the hospital and they're trached and pegged and right. So and they go to some long-term care facility and have, what I would consider kind of not much of a life, right? They're borderline permanently vegetative state, or they require 24-hour nursing care, right? And they're not able to interact with their family, and that doesn't feel like a win. And so we evolved to then, but we could finally get that data from the hospital. And so then what we did was we evolved to neurologically intact survival, right? So this is the idea that what you and I think of as a survivor. Your heart stops, you get your heart restarted, you get admitted to the hospital, and at some point afterwards, you leave the hospital intact, meaning you go home, either back to your life, or you go back and you require a modest amount of assistance. but you can live at home, right? And that's neurologically intact survival. But in order to be able to define that and be able to track it and it be meaningful, we had to come up with some scales to say, this is meaningful survival. And yeah, you left the hospital, but this is not neurologically intact survival. And that's in large part CPC scores, right? So cerebral performance category that was derived in Pittsburgh, or MRS, modified Rankin scale, which is actually borrowed from our friends in stroke. Because in reality, resuscitation is a brain injury, it's a brain disease. But once we got to neurologically intact survival, and we now have a critical mass of neurologically intact survivors, the next kind of frontier, and that's what we're starting to study now, are the disparities in neurologically intact survival, right? So I would love to be able to tell you that it doesn't matter where you arrest in the United States, or it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, or it doesn't matter what race you are, or it doesn't matter if you arrest at home or if you arrest in a public place. But what the disparity literature tells us is that at every link in the chain of survival, there are gross disparities. And when I say gross, there are disparities that are so large they can't be explained by regional variations in whatever, right? Because EMS, like we touched on this earlier, EMS, if you've seen one EMS system, you've seen one EMS system, you've seen one, right? It's all local, right? But there are such gross disparities that they're unexplainable and by usual variation. And so that being said, that is the new frontier in resuscitation science. It is closing the disparity gap
now
between survivors.
When you say disparity, are you speaking about race, gender, income? What necessarily are you whenever you talk about disparities, how would you define that?
I think gender, race, socioeconomic income, access to healthcare, all of those things.
And is that something that should be attacked anecdotally, or is this something we can leverage these registries for to really pinpoint in on, because you go to some communities and the racial disparities are greater than the socioeconomic or the gender. Is this something we can use these registries for to kind of identify in each where the greatest disparities are?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that the beauty, the strength, the beauty of the registry is that if we get good data coming in, we can see these disparities, right? Without the registry, all these disparities are just anecdotal, right? In my own town, right, I know that there's a line that divides our town. My municipality where there is a significant difference in survival, right? Fold higher on one side of this line than the other, right? And without a registry, all we'd say is, gee, if you arrest, north of, I don't know, let's call it 6th Street. If you, or in other towns, it's like if on the other side of the tracks or whatever it is, right? The other side of the highway, anecdotally, if you arrest over there, your chance of survival is pretty bad. But on this side of whatever it is, like, you got a fighting chance.
Mm-hmm.
So we are motivated here at UAB by the adage that geography should not be destiny, right? Where you arrest should not determine whether or not you get a chance at survival.
That's great.
And that has been our driving principle. for the work that we do now. It's that geography shouldn't matter.
So, what kind of kind of diving into maybe some of the projects that you've been involved with, and some of the uh, the research that you are doing? What is the future of that? Are there any devices, or are there any programs, or um, systems of care models that can address this?
I think we are just realizing that this exists. So those of us in the resuscitation community every year go to a conference. It's called the Resuscitation Science Symposium. It's an add-on. It's on the front end of AHA scientific sessions every year, and that's always in the first week in November. And whether designed or not, each one of those annually seems to have a theme. And what we all noticed right before COVID, I think it was in 18, it might have been in 19, I think it was in 18, is that without any influence from the program committee, the theme really was disparity, right? Lots of people were doing epidemiology work that was demonstrating these enormous disparities in survival. And the disparity was over things that we have agreed on as a society should not matter, right? If you believe in equity, these disparities should not exist. And we know they exist. And so to the extent that we can have, instead of, can I put more AEDs, can I buy more AEDs? Can I, buy more ambulances? Can we reduce response times, right? Truly focusing on these now apparent disparities and focus on attempting targeted interventions that are culturally contextualized to fix, or not fix, but at least address these disparities. That's where we're going.
So take us through now some of the, you mentioned some of the retrospective things that happen with registries. What are some of the prospective things that you're doing, kind of, looking at the physical side of resuscitation? You've done some work with Reboa and things like that, maybe some medications that are coming down the line, some neuroprotective medications. What are kind of some things on the horizon that you guys are looking to do there at your lab?
So we are. So let me pick out 3 projects. So the first one, and so the first 2 are kind of acute phase, intra-arrest projects, and the third one is kind of an immediate peri or post-arrest. The first one is we are investigating the idea to use Reboa in cardiac arrest. So for those unfamiliar with Reboa is a technique and a tool that was first used in the Korean War. It is balloon occlusion of the aorta via catheter. Okay, so the idea being that for trauma, if you've got major chest or belly trauma, that you would be able to access the femoral artery, slide a balloon-tipped catheter into the femoral artery, up into the arch of the aorta, blow that balloon up, and occlude the aorta. Now you ask, why would you do this? You do this because if you occlude the aorta, it is physiologically the same as a thoracotomy, right? So we do for trauma, right? An ED thoracotomy and the cross clamp, right? It's for exactly the same reason. If you occlude the aorta, you divert all blood flow, all cardiac output, either back to the heart or up to the brain. That's really good in cardiac arrest because the 2 things I need are blood flow to the brain to keep it alive, and I need coronary perfusion pressure. Bob Berg was the first scientist to demonstrate very clearly that you cannot resuscitate anyone without coronary perfusion pressure greater than 20 millimeters of mercury. And to put that in perspective, right, like that's an average blood pressure is like 120 over 80, right? We're talking about a fraction of that. So the pressure within the coronary arteries. Right? So if we could put Reboa up and divert that blood to the brain, preferentially to the brain and back to the heart, and make the rest of the body ischemic, that's a good thing. And we know this works, right? So in the pig lab, Carl Kern did lots of work in the pig lab, like I think in the early 80s, that demonstrated that this worked. And then up until, I don't know, maybe mid 90s, medical thoracotomy was an accepted technique, right? So now we don't ever do it. But the idea that you would open a chest for a medical cardiac arrest and cross-clamp the aorta and massage the heart, it works great. Mm. The problem is nobody survives the non-sterile procedure, which is opening a chest. I mean, like, it is a barbaric, having done one this weekend, like, it is a barbaric, less than sterile, time-dependent procedure. But if I could do it without having to open a chest, that's a good thing, right? I mean, that's a physiologic fix. So that's one of the things we're exploring. One of the things we're really interested in exploring that is not, can we resuscitate you, but what do we do once the balloon's up? That's a whole different conversation. Number two, I'd like to know what the heart's doing during CPR. And some of my colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania have dropped an echo probe during cardiac arrest, a transesophageal echo during cardiac arrest, and so they put this in behind the heart in your esophagus and look forward at the heart. And what we can figure out is that traditional CPR is not perfect for everybody. And Philippe has demonstrated at RES, where you're watching these folks get CPR and the TE probes in, and clearly the CPR is occluding the aorta. The blood's not going anywhere. Right? With a simple positional change, like, it makes night and day. And so being able to direct the resuscitation in real time, the quality, and when I say quality, not necessarily like depth and rate, I'm talking about the position of the CPR, means that's a big deal, right? So traditional cardiac arrest, you get some drugs, we put the Reboa in, I occlude the aorta, I have directed CPR, so I am maximizing the cardiac output. Once I get you back, really what I need to do is figure out whether or not the insult that you have is so great that you're not going to survive. It doesn't matter what I do. Or not, right? So the idea that cardiac arrest is a brain injury and there's a spectrum of disease. And this is kind of novel for cardiac arrest, right? So ACLS teaches us that everybody gets the same of everything, right? For example, right? Everybody gets the same rate of CPR. Everybody gets the same 1 dose of epi, 1 milligram of epi at the same interval. That's crazy talk, right? Right? And part of that is so that we standardize cardiac arrest, so everybody's not just doing everything. And I get that, but the idea that cardiac arrest and the injury from cardiac arrest is not a spectrum of disease is just Looney Tunes. So following your cardiac arrest, what I would like to be able to do, and the science we're doing at UAB, would be to split you into 3 buckets. Okay, survivors. One bucket is the folks who have very, very little injury or a very mild injury, right? It doesn't matter what I do to them. They're going to do well in spite of me. Okay? Right?
That's humbling.
Yeah, right. But so what I really should just do is leave them alone, right? They need some supportive care, but really they don't need the ultra aggressive stuff we do. And then unfortunately, there's a group at the other end of the spectrum that the insult is so large, it is so profound, that it doesn't really matter what we're going to do. They're going to die, right? Or if they don't die, they will have no quality of life. And we need to acknowledge that, if we can, early, so that we can better allocate our resources and so that families have time to grieve. and we can treat the family, because cardiac arrest is a lot like stroke. A person does not have a cardiac arrest. A person does not have a stroke. A person and their entire family have this condition.
It's a great point.
Right. And there's an entire support network of survivors or survivorship that you have to support. And then there's the group in the middle. And the group in the middle are the true treatment responsive folks. They have enough injury that they're not normal, but it's not so profound that it's not kind of a lost cause. And so that is where we have focused our effort to attempt to identify those folks, so that they can get the ultra aggressive posture. That's kind of what we call it. The maximally invasive resources, so that we can maximize their opportunity to survive neurologically intact. So that just highlights kind of 3 projects that we're working on in order to well optimize cardiac arrest for the kind of the next frontier.
So let me ask you, just based on those, obviously REBOA, that's going to be something that's going to be done in the hospital. You talked about a TEE, transesophageal echo. Is there an opportunity for a transthoracic echo in the field to be able to determine hand placement and depth and effectiveness of chest compressions?
It's really hard. So 2 things. One, transthoracic echo almost always gets in the way, because the fields I need are where you should probably be putting your hands. And the more we look at the literature, transthoracic echo, so on the outside of the chest, really interrupts CPR a lot. And what I really need is CPR. I need high quality CPR, right? So is there an opportunity? Yes. In the hands of a highly skilled operator, in a victim with a habitus that is very favorable, sure. But not routinely. With transesophageal, routinely I can get the views I want and need. Now, let's talk about REBOA for a moment. Please don't write it off. Okay? We have special operations medics who are putting REBOAs in the field, in theater. Okay? And that's where this technology actually comes from. It is from the Korean War. And now we have, in modern era, folks placing these devices in theater to try to save wounded warriors. And so what I would hope we could envision is much like the extension of defibrillators into the field, RSI into the field, right? Is that the next frontier of what we could do is perhaps REBOA in the field, in a civilian context, right?
That's incredible.
Right. So the idea that a medic, or maybe it's a physician responder, like in European system, but there would be a true pre-hospital responder who would be trained to do REBOA, and we could put those things in the field for cardiac arrest and for true trauma, true multi-system penetrating trauma. And why is that? It's because we have proven that it will save lives in trauma. But what we'd really like to prove is that it will save lives in cardiac arrest, and the physiology makes sense. The animal models make sense. And there's about 10 times as many cardiac arrest opportunities to save those lives as there are trauma opportunities to save those lives. And if it becomes about proficiency in a low volume, high risk procedure in an uncontrolled environment, right? I want to, like everything else in EMS, like it's like intubation in EMS, right? I want to concentrate that expertise in a provider who is comfortable and able. And the last time they've done this is not a year ago, right? They are facile, and it is routine because they have developed that expertise.
So where do you think that sweet spot is? If you're in an ultra urban area and you're 5 minutes from a hospital, I I can't imagine doing something like Roboa in the field really is gonna, delaying transport perhaps may not be the best thing. Perhaps being out, an hour from a hospital may not be a great thing. Where do you think that sweet spot is, and what communities, geographically or otherwise, would something like this kind of really be of the most benefit?
I think there's, so I don't know. So we haven't gotten, I don't think it's been deployed enough in a civilian context in the field to figure out what that sweet spot is. Okay. I'm not sure that even with a 5-minute transport time, if truly what I had was a cardiac arrest and we were doing this, that I wouldn't say, no, put the balloon up. And I'd stay and do it.
Well, I mean, if you have to deploy that resource from an area.
Oh yeah, I mean, if they're right. If I have to, but if it's already there,
yeah.
So when I was a medical director, I was before we were doing ECPR, right? I was a big proponent of stay and play for cardiac arrest, and the argument I would make with my medics was, I don't offer you anything at the hospital that you can't do. Right. And these were the days we were doing cold saline in the field and fundamentally, if I've trained you well, if the medic is well trained and is bright, the hospital, until the era of kind of ECPR, the hospital didn't really offer anything that couldn't be brought to the patient's side. Right. If you design the system well. And so I was a big advocate in our system to stay and play. Now, I think that calculation has changed a bit with the advent of ECPR. There's a reason to scoop and run, and it's because, at least in the civilian context in the States, we can't really deploy ECPR. Now, that's very different than in Europe, right? The guys at SAMU do that. Yeah. I'm sure you guys have seen the response vehicle in Minnesota that Demetrius got, right? Right. So for folks who are not aware of, Dimitri Yiannopoulos has just deployed this very large ambulance that essentially you can do. I mean, I think you can cath in the back of the thing.
You can. It's essentially a cath lab.
It's essentially a
C-arm fluoro. Right.
Right. C-arm fluoro, you can cath and do ECPR in the back of the thing, and it's on wheels, right? And so outside of contexts like that, where I can bring it, maybe there's a reason to scoop and run. But if I can bring Roboa to you, I don't know, I might make an argue to stay and play. I think what that really requires is, an N of more than one, an experience of more than one person or one municipality to figure out how that deploys, and then engaged medical director who can weigh the options in a thoughtful way, right? If I don't have ECPR access, and I'm not really sure why I'm scooping and running.
Right.
If I got ECPR and it's 5 minutes away, and it's a VF arrest, and I give them a shock and a dose, and I can't get them out, I think you make a pretty reasonable argument that what you really ought to do is go into the hospital and put them on pump. That's a reason for a system. That's a reason to build a system and not rules, but guidelines on what to do and where to go.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think the commitment there too. I mean, the hospital has to make that commitment to the system, and I think traditionally hospitals have been reluctant to do that. It's been we'll put them in the hospital. If they survive, we'll do some stuff for them, and if they don't, that's kind of what happens. And even across cardiology, the difference in how even an interventionalist is going to care for the patient, the spectrum is incredibly wide. And so all the more reason for the data to be able to show that, and to be able to not force people's hands, but show And like you said too, though, the knowing which ones are going to benefit most from a therapy or for being aggressive. And a lot of that disconnect we have found is in the information gathered from the scene to those that are going to be doing either the immediate care or the definitive care. If we don't have that information correct, then we're likely going to err on the side of, well, downtime was probably longer than what we're maybe thinking, and neurological outcome is probably not going to be there, or the patient's not going to survive, so we're going to be less aggressive. So I think all those things together are really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Kurz, I just want to thank you for your time, and we've had you for a pretty good bit now, but maybe in closing, I just wanted to say at the beginning, I was definitely joking about the blonde hair comment. Whenever you were at the conference in Atlanta, I do want to say this in all seriousness and encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because the way that you pour into paramedics, the way that you pour into EMS, and you are a champion of us, I can't tell you what it means. You won probably 1,000 fans after speaking that morning. So I just want to say thank you personally, because it truly means the world to have somebody, standing up for us like that. So.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it's because I have roots. I've got pre-hospital roots, right? And this is really where I cut my teeth. And so to the extent that I had the privilege to train in the pre-hospital space, I feel it is my responsibility to be able to advocate for the professionals that slog it out every day in the back of an ambulance or on the street. And I'm uniquely aware of the challenges that an uncontrolled environment provide. And so I am universally thankful for the job that EMS does every day. And frankly, they're doing right now as we're talking to make sure that our communities get cared for.
Well, I would encourage those listening to kind of just research a little bit more about what you're doing. And I think they're going to see some things coming in the near future, your name on a lot of some updates and some changes of things coming down the line with AHA and, some of the guidelines. And, I think, my frustration over the last several decades is a lot of the recommendations and guidelines have just been kind of based on a lot of good ideas, a lot of expert consensus. I know I am encouraged by some of the future things that I hope to see come out are truly based on science and the best evidence out there. And with you at that helm, I think we're in a really good spot to know that what comes out is going to be meaningful. But I think probably for me, the things that you have said that resonated most with me, if we're not measuring it, then it really doesn't matter. That we have to commit, that we have to make that commitment, and not just as an EMS agency, but really as a system to really understand that. So do you have any recommendations, those that want to kind of learn more about resuscitation? What are some of the best journals or, some of the best places we kind of go to, see this kind of in a nutshell, kind of get the down and dirty without having to go too far, but we can really get the kind of the meat of what we should know about resuscitation and kind of where we're headed as a profession.
So if you want to pick a journal, a scientific journal, it's Resuscitation. It's the gold standard for us, and it's a European resuscitation, the ERC journal. And the beauty of the ERC's journal is that you get a flair of science that's also being done outside the United States, right? So it's not U.S. focused. And frankly, our colleagues in Europe, our colleagues in Japan, our colleagues in Korea, our colleagues in Australia and New Zealand, they all skin this cat kind of differently. And we can all benefit from reading and sharing that knowledge. If you really want the kind of the whole enchilada experience, there is nothing better then the Resuscitation Science Symposium is part of AHA Scientific Sessions in the fall. It'll be in November this year. It's always the first week in November. I believe it's in Chicago this year, although I may be incorrect. There are, for all of everyone listening in EMS, there are stipends, there are travel scholarships for you to be able to go, because we appreciate that. So the Heart Association and the 3 CPR Council appreciates that for EMS providers, traveling to this conference and staying for a couple days is a fairly expensive endeavor. But to attempt to offset a large part of that cost, there are travel scholarships that you can apply for through the AHA, so that you can come and be part of the resuscitation community. And frankly, over the years, a number of the folks who have gone and done that have then gone on to volunteer for the Heart Association, influence the guidelines, sit on AHA committees that provide guidance and write statements and influence the care, not just of the patient in front of you, not just the care of the patients that your agency may take care of, but quite literally the standard by which most of the U.S. and a large portion of the world resuscitates patients.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you again, sir, for your time, and we hope to see you soon.
I look forward to it. It was a great time there in Georgia when you guys had me out. You were so very kind. The hospitality was outstanding. Awesome. And I look forward to the next chance I get to come say hi to you guys.
Yes, sir. Well, take care and be safe out there.
Thanks, guys.